If you reduce it to facts, it sounds simple. 16. Pregnant. Asked to leave. But facts don't show temperature. They don't show the way my mother folded the dish towel 3 times before saying, "You can't stay here." They don't show my father's voice, not loud, just firm, like he was closing a business deal instead of a door. There was no screaming. That would have been easier to hate. They spoke about reputation, about neighbors, about consequences. They did not speak about fear, or about how I was still a child. The suitcase was already packed when my father placed it by the entryway. I remember thinking that meant they'd discussed it, planned it. I wasn't being reacted to. I was being removed. When I stepped outside, I carried 2 things: a duffel bag and the quiet belief that I had ruined everything. For a long time, I thought exile was proof that I deserved it. The first apartment smelled like old carpet and fried onions. I worked evenings at a grocery store, mornings at a daycare so I could bring my son with me. I learned how to calculate formula costs faster than algebra ever came to me. No one applauded. There were nights I sat on the kitchen floor after he fell asleep, staring at overdue notices, trying not to cry because crying didn't change the numbers. I didn't spend those years angry. That surprises people. Anger requires energy. I didn't have any. What I had was momentum. Forward was the only direction available. Community college first, 1 class at a time. My son in a stroller in the campus hallway while I read case studies during his naps. Later, scholarships. Then law school, part-time, relentless, expensive. I chose family law without fully understanding why. Maybe I did understand. I just didn't say it out loud. Somewhere along the way, shame stopped being my name. It happened gradually. The first time a professor praised my argument in class. The first client who shook my hand and said, "Thank you for fighting for me." The first paycheck that covered more than survival. I stopped rehearsing apologies in my head for something that had already happened. I stopped wondering if my parents would ever call. They didn't. Birthdays passed. Graduations passed. My son learned to ride a bike, then to drive a car. He grew tall, taller than me by 15. He never asked why his grandparents weren't around. Children don't miss what they never meet. He saw exhaustion, yes, but he also saw discipline, stability, a mother who showed up. That mattered more than reputation. They came back when he was 20, not because they'd found regret, because they'd found curiosity. My mother's voice on the phone sounded older, softened by time. She said they had heard through distant relatives that my son was in university, that he was doing well, that they wanted to reconnect, to meet their grandson. The word grandson sat strangely in the air, as if it had been waiting in a drawer for 2 decades. They didn't apologize. They said we were strict because we cared. It was a careful sentence, one that protects the speaker. I told them we could meet. I chose the location. My office occupies the 3rd floor of a restored brick building downtown. The brass directory by the elevator lists my name followed by partner. I remember standing by the reception desk when they stepped out of the elevator. They looked smaller than I remembered. Older, obviously, but also smaller in posture. My father's shoulders curved inward, my mother's hair thinner. Time had touched them, just as it had touched me. They looked around first, at the glass-walled conference rooms, at the framed degrees, at the quiet efficiency of staff moving with purpose. One of my associates walked past and said, "Morning, Ms. Rahman," without breaking stride. A few minutes later, a judge I'd worked with on a custody case passed through the lobby and nodded. "Counselor." It wasn't staged. It was just my Tuesday. But I saw it register. They hadn't come expecting this. My son arrived last. Confidence, steady. He shook their hands politely when I introduced them. He didn't hesitate. He didn't flinch. He didn't look ashamed of me. That was the moment that shifted everything. Not the degrees, not the office, him. He stood there, articulate, grounded, self-assured, the living contradiction of every fear they'd used to justify abandoning me. My mother blinked too quickly. My father cleared his throat. "You've done well." I almost smiled at the phrasing. as if I'd completed a project. "We built a life," I said evenly. "No edge, no accusation, just fact." They began speaking about family, about lost time, about wanting to be involved now. And for the first time in 20 years, I understood something clearly. Access is not inherited. It is built. I explained that my son was an adult, that any relationship would be his choice. That trust takes consistency, not blood. I spoke calmly, professionally, the way I speak in court when outlining custody arrangements, clear expectations, defined boundaries. There was no shouting, no humiliation, just structure, authority, visible and unmistakable. They nodded, because what else could they do? For 20 years, they had been the final word in my story. Now, they were applicants. After they left, my son and I stood by the window overlooking the street. "You okay?" he asked. I considered the question carefully. "I am," I said, and I was. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just steady. They hadn't seen ruin when they walked into that building. They had seen consequence. They had seen the result of a girl they once believed incapable of surviving on her own. I didn't deny them the possibility of knowing him. But I did not chase their approval either. The door I walked out of at 16 closed behind me. This one, if it opens, will open on terms built from dignity, not desperation. That's the difference, and that difference took 20 years.